I opened my eyes, slowly. My head seemed to float, and a dull ache surrounded my throat. I felt thirsty. That was the first thing I noticed. I moistened my dry lips as my surroundings faded from focus. My body ached, and I realized that I was tied tightly to a metal chair in the middle of an empty room. The concrete walls were stained and dirty. Under my bare feet it was wet and cold. There was a single light bulb dangling from the ceiling by a rope. It cast a moving shadow. An open door lay before me, but I could see nothing but a corridor wall. I tried to clear my mind, tried to remember how I had gotten there. I closed my eyes tightly and forced myself not to panic. I slowed my breathing and focused on my thoughts, trying to force myself to remember why I was there. I couldn't remember anything. I opened my eyes and let out a breath, my throbbing throat dry. I could hear sounds echoing off the walls outside the corridor. Shouts, knocks, howls, all very distant, but that didn't help to calm my nerves. "Hello?" I spoke loudly, the words seeming to break through my vocal cords. Thought I felt my chest constrict with pain, but I choked and shouted again. "Is anyone there? Hello?" The dark corridor remained silent except for the constant echoes. I shut my mouth and tried to free myself from my bonds, but the rope was tied impossibly tight. I fought against my imagination, which filled my mind with horrifying scenarios of what awaited me, if only I could remember a little something. Suddenly, footsteps emerged from the door in a rapid pattern of small feet. My hopes were renewed, and I turned my attention to the door, praying that it was help. A boy ran into the room wearing a red onesie, the kind that comes with socks attached. Over his face was a plastic devil mask. The holes in his eyes revealed two huge blue bulbs, eyes that looked at me curiously. Half stunned, I opened my mouth to say something when I noticed that something was strange. His eyes were huge, impossibly round and bulging. It sent an agonizing shiver down my spine, but I pushed it aside. The child could set me free. "Hey," I whispered urgently. "Hey, kid, can you get me out of here?" The boy took a step forward, turning his head sideways but still in silence. I shook my bound arms against the chair. "Let me go, please, I shouldn't be here. Someone's made a mistake." The boy watched me from behind his mask and stopped right in front of me. He leaned forward, whispering, his voice like wet silk. "You did a bad thing." Confused, I shook my head. No, that's a mistake. I didn't do anything." The huge blue eyes filled with sadness. "Oh yes, you did. Something very, very bad." I shook my head again, more violently. "No, forgive me. I don't remember. Please let me out of this chair." Suddenly, before he or I could say anything, a man came running into the room. He was fat and wearing overalls, his wrinkled face twisted in accumulated anger. In his arms, he held a short-barreled shotgun. "I didn't do anything," I cried, as he advanced towards us, my voice wavering. "I shouldn't be here." The giant ignored me and grabbed the child and pinned him against the wall. The boy grunted as his back hit the concrete, and his eyes rose to meet the gray-haired man. Without saying a word, the man raised his rifle, placed it against the boy's forehead, and blew his brains out. Pieces of brain splattered on the walls with a shock that punched me in the stomach like an iron knuckle. There was a ringing in my ears, and time seemed to stand still as I watched the headless body crumble to the ground. The air returned to my lungs, and time seemed to return. "Jesus Christ in heaven," I screamed, struggling against the restraints, my eyes almost falling out of my face with terror. "What the fuck is this?" The man ignored my screams as he bent down to pick up the body. He slung the torn corpse over his shoulder and walked out the door. Soon the corridor erupted in malicious laughter, a chorus of voices ululating in joy. I closed my eyes, a deafening sound that filled my pores with terror. Minutes later, the laughter subsided, and I cautiously opened my eyes, not believing what I had just witnessed. Hello? I jumped when I realized that another man was standing in front of me. He was wearing a plain white button-down shirt and jeans. His brown hair was cut short, and he looked to be in his 30s. His green eyes were empty and lifeless, his thick lips pulled down at the corners. "What's going on? Where am I?" I cried, burning fear building up in my stomach. The man crossed his arms. "So you're the new guy, huh?" He shook his head. "Your type disgusts me." There were questions on the tip of my tongue, but he waved his arms, telling me to keep quiet. He ran his tongue over his upper teeth. "Looks like you've seen some of the horrors that lurk in this place, huh?" "Yeah, I can tell by the look on your face. You're terrified. You've seen something, haven't you? The past doesn't seem so bad now, does it? You've only been here 5 minutes and you're already shitting your pants." "Where am I?" I gasped, unable to keep quiet any longer. "What do you want with me?" The man held his hands behind his back. "I bet you want to get out of here, don't you? I bet you want to go home, to your family, everything." "Please," I interrupted him, "whatever I did to you, I'm sorry, I really am, but I don't remember." The man rolled his eyes. "You didn't do anything for me. You did it to yourself. You really don't remember anything." I shook my head negatively and felt tears well up in my eyes, liquid fear. He looked at me with contempt. "You waited for your wife to leave for work, and then you went into the shed and hanged yourself. You're dead." The recent memory emerged like a monster from a swamp. No matter how much I wanted to deny it, he was right. I had killed myself. The fact passed through my brain like a bullet train and left me pensive. "My name is Danny, by the way," he said, ignoring my shocked face. "And I'm number 2 here. I'll take care of the orientation process. I want it to be quick because I'm sick of having to repeat it to you, pathetic suicides. You get one question before I start." He looked me up and down, and I tried to organize my jumbled thoughts into something cohesive. It was all terrifying. Why had I killed myself? I fought down the panic, and slowly the fog of confusion cleared. I had just lost my job. Yes, that was the beginning. I squeezed my eyes shut and forced other memories to surface. I had just lost my job and was about to lose my house. My wife, Tess, found out what was going on and was going to leave me. I had nowhere to run, no other option. The redundancy came out of the blue and I had no savings. I was broke, soon to become homeless, and my wife hated me for it. But there was something else. Yes, there was. She was cheating on me. I had read some messages on her cell phone while she was asleep at night and confirmed my suspicions. My life had turned to shit, and there were no more options for me. Humiliated and ashamed, I decided that death was my only way out. "Hey, you fuck, do you have a question or not?" Danny said, snapping his fingers in my face. I snapped back to reality and asked the only thing that mattered. "Is this hell?" Danny snorted. Always the same question. He started pacing back and forth in front of me. "No, this isn't hell. It's not heaven either. This is the Black Farm. And no, I didn't name it that. This is where God sends the souls who have taken their own lives. Suicides. Understand, he doesn't really know what to do with you, and well, neither does Satan. There are genuinely good people who kill themselves. It seems cruel to send them to hell for all eternity for a moment of weakness, you know. Personally, I just think that God and Satan were tired of arguing about it. So, well, they send you here, to the Black Farm. Did God create this place? I asked, getting more and more confused. Danny spat on the floor, laughing. Of course, at some point. But he lost control when he put the pig in control. What's the pig? I asked, but unsure if I really wanted to know the answer. Danny raised a hand, annoyed. Fuck, can I finish talking? God created this place years ago, put the pig in charge, and then forgot about it for a while. Well, when he turned his back, the pig decided to use his new powers to try and create his own little world. This mess you see around you is the fractured remains of this experiment. The Black Farm was pretty cool before, but the pig wanted things to be different. He wanted to create his own vision. These beings you see, these monsters, they're the pig's attempts to create functional life. Instead of replicating God's earth, these mutated, horrible creations are full of sin and hatred. They are rampant here, unabated. This place is chaos. The Black Farm is a circus of freaks and monsters, and it's their eternity. Fear simmered in my stomach like hot oil. No, this couldn't be the end of me. I didn't believe in things like that. It's not real. Soon I'd wake up and realize it was just a bad dream. It has to be. Danny stood in front of me and gently patted my cheek. Hey, don't go into hysterics yet. I'm not finished here. I raised my watery eyes to meet his. Danny smiled. You can always feed the pig. My breath seemed to burn out of my lungs. Whoa, what do you mean? Danny spread his arms, still smiling. It's as simple as that. Feed the pig. If you do, there's a chance he'll send you back to life. And what happens if he doesn't? I stammered. You'll be sent to hell. So toss the coin if you have one. Stay here with us or feed the pig. If you choose to stay, I'll let you go there. He pointed to the door, but I assure you, what awaits you at the end of the corridor? Well, let's just say that hell isn't much worse than that. I swallowed, trying my best to digest it all. Why wouldn't I try to feed the pig, whatever that meant? If there was a shred of hope left, I would. An eternity in this place on the Black Farm, in hell or feeding the pig. I'd do anything to get back. This nightmare made my problems seem like nothing. Danny held up his hand before I could speak. I'll leave you to think for a while. I'll come back later. I want to feed the pig, I shouted, not wanting to spend another second in that room. I could hear a woman screaming at the end of the corridor, her crying increasing as something fleshy slammed into her. My breath was coming in sharp gasps from my lungs, and my throat was burning. Danny noticed the sound and smiled openly. That sounds awful, doesn't it? He said softly, as the woman's voice broke in agony. Something was still beating against her, the sound of battered flesh making my imagination flood with nightmares. Please, I gasped. Just let me feed the pig. I don't want to stay here another second. Danny turned and walked away. I'll be back later. Enjoy your time alone. Think carefully about your situation. Weigh up your options. And remember, it was you who put yourself here. And with that, he left, leaving me in the dimly lit room. Tears rolled down my cheeks. The woman continued to scream for hours. At some point, I fell into a semi-sleep. The darkness of the room seemed to press down on me, and my eyes closed, though my body ached, and my throat was a circle of fire. Thirst had settled in my throat like a shard of glass. My lips felt like crumpled paper. Thunder rumbled in my head. The room came into focus and my mind wandered to the horrifying sounds that never ceased. I was lost in a fog, not realizing that something was sliding into the room until I felt a hard pinch on my big toe. I snapped out of my daze as my bare foot throbbed in pain. I screamed and tried to move, but my restraints were firm. My vision came back into focus, and I blinked in agony as I felt blood trickle through my toes. I looked down to see the source of my pain and felt a scream forming in my throat. Looking down at me was a man with no arms. He crawled along the ground like a worm, his bald head full of scars and dirt. His legs were bound tightly together by barbed wire, forcing him to scramble across the ground to move. His eyes had no eyelids and were wide open, two reddish-white balls that stared at me hungrily. Its teeth had been removed and replaced by large screws that protruded from its gums like an irregular rock formation. Around his neck was a chain collar, which I followed with my eyes across the floor to the open door. The end of the collar was being held by a tall, naked man. He was hairless and flabby, covered in similar scars to his pet. A dirty bag had been placed over his head, and I couldn't see much of his face, apart from the red eye peering through the bag's single hole. He looked at me and grabbed his swollen penis, his breathing heavy. As the armless man wriggled towards me again, his owner began to masturbate. I screamed as the mouthful of screws bit me again, but my screams seemed to stimulate the naked man even more. "Get off me! Stop!" I shouted, horrified. I tried to kick the man, doing my best to avoid the sharp metal. I drove my heel into the top of his head, and he screamed as his head hit the floor. A groan of pleasure escaped the bagman's mouth, and I turned around as a black mist sprayed the floor. There was a rattling of chains, and I turned again to see them leaving, the armless man being dragged away by the neck. I looked to where the naked man had ejaculated and saw a puddle of dead ants. I vomited on myself, a mixture of bile and other fluids. "I want to get out of here," I screamed, vomit running down my chin. "I don't belong here." I heard the two men walk away down the corridor, the sound of chains accompanied by the sound of flesh being dragged across concrete. I screamed again, but I knew no one would help me. I spat a mixture of phlegm and bile onto the floor, ridding my mouth of the bitterness. By force, I tried to calm down. It wasn't easy. After a while, I heard someone else approaching. I was in a period of miserable calm, my mind a blank canvas on a black sea, but the noise snapped me out of my trance. The muscles in my arms burned from being tied up for so long, and I stimulated them desperately, trying my best to prepare myself for the next horror that would come through that door. Footsteps approached, and then a woman entered the room. She stopped at the door and looked at me. She didn't have an eye, just a cavernous hole in her skull. Her hair was messy and wild, a brown tangle like a forgotten nest. Her skin was pale and dirty, and she was dressed in rags. I couldn't find out how old she was, but there was maturity in her one remaining eye. "Still thinking?" he asked me, his voice brittle and cursed. "What?" He took a step towards me. "Are you still making up your mind whether to feed the pig or not?" I looked at her cautiously. "I am. Who are you? What do you want?" "I was once in your position," I said, trying to decide my fate. I could hardly believe that all this was happening, that this is what happens after we die. That's not how I learned it. Religion didn't warn me about this place. I tried to loosen up once more before asking, "Did you kill yourself too? Are you a person like me? Aren't you one of those creations?" She laughed. "It breaks my heart to know that you still have to ask." She touched the hole that had once been her eye. "But I understand your caution. Yes, I'm suicidal. I've been here a long, long time. But that was my choice. I decided I'd rather stay here." I gestured with my head towards the door. "What's out there? What is this place?" She sighed heavily and leaned on the door. "I can hardly describe this place. There's nothing like it. Nothing you've ever experienced. You leave the corridor and go to... there to... end. She swallowed. You have to see it to understand. How bad is it? Why are these mutant people hurting and killing each other? I asked. She let her head rest against the wall. It would take you years to fully understand this place. Years you don't have. Now you have to make a decision. Stay or feed the pig. They say hell is worse than here, but it can't be that much worse. Monsters and suicides surround the Black Farm. Killing, raping, brutalizing. And then you wake up wondering how long you can survive before someone kills you. It's an endless cycle. Then why did you stay? I pressed her. Why didn't you feed the pig? I don't even know what that means, but I'd do anything for a chance to come back. I can't stay here. I just can't. She smiled sadly at me. Why? Why did I choose this? It's quite simple, really. I'm a coward. I was a coward in life, and I'm a coward in death. When the time came, I chose to stay here. I didn't know what was waiting for me out there. It came down to a simple choice, made by my own fear. She turned to leave. I guess you'll have to figure that out yourself. But be warned. Think carefully before you decide. Sometimes suffering for your fear is better than suffering for eternity. Be brave. What do I do? I shouted, rocking in my chair as she walked through the door. She stopped and looked back over her shoulder one last time. Her eye glared at me, and her voice was just a whisper. Feed the pig. And with that, she was gone. I sat in silence again. My mind was spinning, desperately weighing up my options. I still couldn't comprehend the total situation I was in. It was too much for me. The other side of life shouldn't be like this. I didn't know what to expect, but it certainly wasn't this nightmare. Questions crashed through my mind like icy waves against the hull of a sinking ship. How could I make a choice when I didn't even know what it would bring? This place. The Black Farm. I couldn't stay there. But what if I went to hell? What would happen if I wasn't sent back? I'd be sent to the fire. My existence would be condemned to eternal misery. But here there were people like me. Suicidal. Not just monsters and mutilated murderers. Maybe I could fit in with them, come up with a plan to escape together to a better place. Surely that would be better than hell. No, that's not how I'm going to spend the rest of my eternity. I refuse to accept that. If there was any hope, no matter how small, I wouldn't want to keep wondering how it could have been. I wouldn't want to be tormented by doubt. I would feed the pig and accept his choice about my fate. When I weighed up the measures, that was my only option. I would feed the pig. Hey, hello, Danny? I shouted, rocking in my chair. I've made up my mind, Danny. After a few seconds, I heard footsteps echoing down the corridor towards me. Danny came through the door, an annoyed expression on his face. I've made my choice, I said. I'm going to feed the pig. You seem to have done a lot of thinking since you left, Danny observed wryly. I licked my dry lips. You'd do the same thing if you were in my place. Danny stood behind me. I was once in the same position as you, and I chose differently. I opened my eyes wide, but then Danny covered my head with a thin cloth, blinding me. I pulled a lot of air into my lungs, but my breaths didn't seem to contain any oxygen. I felt Danny cut my bonds, and my body eased as my stiff muscles were released. I rotated my shoulders when my hands were released, and moaned at the sensation. I scratched my back, and then stretched, my bones rattling. Don't take the blindfold off and come with me, Danny said, pulling me along. My legs were shaking from the unexpected weight, especially my thighs from having been in the same position for so long. I reached out blindly in front of me and found Danny's shoulders. I rested my hands on him as Danny led me out. As we entered the corridor, I could hear sounds that I hadn't heard before. The rattling of chains, a long sound of flesh breaking, something vomiting. These noises went on forever in my ears, painting the darkness of my vision with imaginary scenes of terror. I squeezed Danny's shoulder harder, stumbling onto his back, my heart racing. I heard something dragging behind us, but Danny didn't seem to notice, or if he did, he didn't care. The sound of flesh hitting the wall seemed to sound inches away from me, and suddenly I could feel a hot breath on the back of my neck, followed by the click of my tongue against my teeth. My breathing became even more rapid as fear overwhelmed me. "You're going to feed the pig, aren't you?" Something whispered in my ear. I felt something being pressed against the back of my head, but I just tried not to think about what it might be. It was wet and gooey, and I heard the thing giggle. "It's a hungry pig, so make sure you feed it now." The thing whispered again, its voice thick in a way I didn't even know was possible. It sounded like a series of grunts and groans put together to form broken words. To my relief, I heard the thing go back to where it had come from, and I continued to follow Danny. It continued in silence as we walked, and soon I could feel a change in the air. The heavy heat changed to a cooler, almost pleasant temperature, but it soon continued to drop until my body began to shiver violently against the cold. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel a breeze, as if we were on the street. I hadn't heard Danny opening any doors, but nothing there was normal. It was as if reality had shattered and melted away. Teeth chattering, I was overcome by unexpected heat and gasped. My feet fell apart as the terrain changed, and now I felt like I was walking on something like warm metal. My ears were filled with the noises of huge ovens and industrial machines. I couldn't see, but I felt there was a large open field ahead. I smelled ash and felt a foul taste in my mouth, sweat already forming along my spine. Suddenly I crashed into Danny, who had stopped dead in his tracks. I quickly took a few steps back and whispered apologies. I could hear movement in front of us, a clinking of chains and a strange click on the metal floor. Something else too. Something snoring. And then the room was filled with the deafening noise of a pig squealing. I covered my ears, my head spinning from the extremely high-pitched sound. I gritted my teeth as the sound echoed off the metal floor and dissipated into a series of squeaks and grunts. It appeared to be absolutely enormous. "I brought one more," Danny announced, a slight tone of respect in his voice. "He wants to feed the pig." I waited, hoping to hear a response, the cloth over my eyes leaving me in the dark. I noticed that my knees were shaking and that I was covered in sweat. I was totally terrified. "If that's what you want," Danny said, and I felt his hand on mine. Apparently there had been a silent conversation that I hadn't participated in, so Danny grabbed me by the wrist and pulled me forward. "Approach the pig," he instructed me. My whole body was shaking, and I couldn't move. Unable to see, I raised my hands, feeling for nothing, the heat and ash making me sick. I sit up, like I'm going to throw up, my stomach gurgling. I didn't know where I was or what horrors lay before me. I felt lost and tiny, my tears soaking the blindfold. Please," I begged. "Let me see what's going on." Danny appeared behind me, pushing me forward. He guided my hands to something as we stomped the floor in unison. Even with the cloth over my face, I could see a giant black mass rising like a tower over me. It was like a black dot on a dark screen. As I walked forward, I was hit by a horrible smell that made me gag even more, so I turned around. Danny's grip tightened and forced me to continue. I could feel something very close in front of me, a huge mass of living flesh. The smell reached absurd levels of disgusting, and I almost threw up again. Hot air was being blown into my face, a warming breeze that came in short gusts. I vomited into my hood, the source of the smell steaming in the hot air. I choked as bile spilled onto the fabric, the immersion momentarily cutting off my oxygen. Danny slapped my hands that wanted to take off the blindfold, and it took me a few seconds to be able to breathe again. I was crying openly now, fear and misery destroying my willpower. The wet cloth stank as I sucked in air. My own stomach acid covered my skin, and I just begged for this to end soon. And then something screeched right in front of me. I felt my bladder give way. I was facing the pig. He was the source of the darkness that plagued me, a fat, titanic creature that filled my senses with every breath of air it threw at my face. Danny lifted my hand and made me touch the pig's nose. I immediately retracted my arm, but Danny forced my hand back. Its fur was rough and spiky, and as my shaking hands explored its nose, the animal's size became clear to me. It was gigantic and must have weighed a ton. Her skin jiggled beneath my sweaty hands, and she opened her mouth slightly. My fingers are wrapped around teeth the size of kitchen knives, and I realize that the mouth is absolutely cavernous. The pig squealed again, and I heard his hooves hit the ground. It sounded like summer thunder across an open field. "Take off the blindfold, please," I begged, my legs turning to jelly. Danny had taken a few steps back, and I heard the reverence in his voice. "You wouldn't want that." I jumped as the pig sniffed at me, that wet piece of meat pressing against my face. I felt a shiver, raising my hands and hiding a scream of terror. "Feed the pig," Danny instructed me, his voice icy. "You made your choice. Now live with her. It's the only chance you have to come back. Or maybe the pig doesn't like your taste and sends you to hell. There's only one way to find out." My eyes widened beneath the vomit cloth. "Don't like my taste?" "Get in his mouth." My bladder gave way again, and I felt hot piss run down my legs. No, you can't be saying that." Danny's voice got harder. "Get in his mouth and don't stop until he's finished." Please," I begged, turning towards Danny's voice, stretching out my arms blindly. "Please, there must be another way. Don't make me do this." I was a mess of snot and tears, my words stumbling out of my mouth like a baby learning to talk. Danny stepped forward and turned me around so I was facing the pig. "Enter. You've made your choice. It will all be over soon. It's your only chance." I could feel the pig's breath on my face, his nose inches away from me. The heat and the smell it gave off made me want to vomit again, but I held myself back. This was crazy. It couldn't be happening. My mind spun between fear and chaos. There had to be another way. I couldn't do that. I couldn't do it. Suddenly, the woman's words came to my mind. "Sometimes, suffering because of your fear is better than suffering for all eternity. Be brave." This was my only chance to return alive to the world I knew. I had made the worst possible mistake when I committed suicide. If I could go back and change my life, I wouldn't have to live the rest of my eternity there or in hell. I could change everything, secure a better place for my soul, somewhere away from the pig. But what if he decided to send me to hell? How much suffering could I take? I had to take my chance. "Please, God," I whispered, taking a step forward. "If you can hear me, please have mercy." My shaking hands touched the pig, and I clung to his thick fur. I felt him lower his head slightly and open his mouth. Now he was waiting for me, his hot, heavy breathing burning my nostrils. That was it. I couldn't give up anymore. I slowly grabbed his teeth and pulled myself into his jaw. His head was tilted, then immediately fell onto his stomach at a 45-degree incline. The wet tongue wiggled beneath me, and I was shaking so hard I could barely breathe. The tears mixed with the vomit on my hood, and I could feel my heart exploding in irregular beats inside my rib cage. Slowly, I grabbed a deeper tooth to continue dragging myself. Gritting my teeth, I crawled in up to my ankles. The pig raised his head, and I was completely horizontal on his tongue. Crying with fear, I looked in front of me and found more teeth. I pushed myself deeper into his mouth and felt my feet pass through his lips. My entire body was now covered in gooey drool, and I was sobbing openly, searching blindly for other teeth. And that's when the pig started chewing me. I screamed in agony as my body was squeezed between huge teeth. I heard my legs crack and immediately felt the bone in my left leg becoming exposed. I shook violently as my body spasmed from the shock, a tangle of blood and pain. His tongue moved around, and I felt a bite on my shoulder. My eyes almost popped out of their sockets, and I howled in pain. My collarbone was nothing but wreckage now. Unable to control myself, I vomited a lot. The pain was too much. Don't stop coming. Screaming, eyes turning red, I used my good arm to reach another tooth. I almost broke my own jaw. I was pressing my teeth against each other so hard, blood dripping from the corner of my mouth as my fingers wrapped around something solid. The pig bit again, his tongue swirling my body so that his molars destroyed my knees. The pain made everything go dark, but my screams forced my eyes wide open. "Jesus, make this end!" I roared, my hands shaking, searching for more teeth. My God, just finish it ASAP. I pressed so hard on my teeth that I felt them break. Screaming, I pushed myself further into the huge mouth. Something was changing, the tight walls of her throat pushing against my head. That's when I realized it was almost over. "Come on, motherfucker, let's go," I begged, my vocal cords on edge. I put my hand forward and grabbed a thick piece of meat. My head felt like it was going to explode, and I felt the pig bite again. I gasped, blood exploding from my mouth. He had pierced my stomach, turning my organs into modeling clay. The darkness filled my vision, and I could no longer scream. With the last bit of my strength, I pushed myself one last time and felt my body slide down his throat. Darkness, falling, screaming. I was screaming. Heat. Such intense heat that I thought I was going to melt. Something banging, like a hammer against metal. Images and colors flashed past me so quickly that I couldn't make out the shapes. Blood came out of my eyes. It was like I was falling forever. My eyes opened and I was falling, the air returning to my lungs with a wonderful rush of purity. My face hit the wooden floor and I cried when I felt my nose breaking. I tasted blood and saw stars. I had stopped falling. There was a burning circle on my neck and I felt very thirsty. I was lying on the floor. I slowly opened my eyes and the darkness began to dissipate. Colors and shapes mixed until my vision focused. I was in the shed. I put my hand on my neck and gasped when I saw the source of the burning. It was the rope. I had hanged myself with it, but now it was broken. Relief rolled through my body in wonderful waves of gratitude. I lay on the floor of the warehouse, crying, tears dripping from my eyes onto the dusty floor. My body was shaking, but it was intact. I had been spared. I was alive again. From my spot on the floor, I rolled onto my back, my voice wavering. Thank you, God. Oh, thank you so much. I felt another wave of uncontrollable crying take over me. I promise that I won't waste my life. I promise that I will make everything right. I will fix everything. I don't know how long it was before I got up. Time seemed irrelevant. My mind refused to go back to the way it was before. All the horrors I had witnessed changed me forever. But I knew, from that moment on, that I would do everything to have the best life possible. I would live every day as if it were my last. I would dedicate my time to helping those who go through dark phases like I did. I would contact as many suicidal people as possible and try to save them from the horrors of the other world. I don't want anyone else to have to witness the nightmares of suicide. I don't want anyone else to have to feed the pig